Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be looking at We Don't Talk About Bruno, the one thing we're not supposed to do, right, in Encanto. So let's just get right on into it. A lot of people have said a lot of things about this piece, so we're just going to be taking a look at like how it's structured, some different considerations, and how the music's working, and we'll see what happens. I'm Dr. Zach. Don't forget to grab your cup of tea and join me. All right, so we don't talk about Bruno. I once again have put in parentheses what Genius Lyrics thinks each of these different parts of the songs are named. This beginning, we actually kind of do get an introduction. If you watch the movie, some of the music starts to come in before we get this first We Don't Talk About Bruno. But if you exclude that and you just listen to the soundtrack, how it is on like a streaming service, this is the first thing you hear. So this is the first piece in the whole movie so far that we don't get an introduction. Kind of interesting. Instead, we get that hook, right? We don't talk about Bruno, no, no, no. And that's why I have the hook kind of as a question mark, because that seems really what this is about. It's kind of like that technique where you put the hook first and then you like kind of review it as you go through the piece. But also, I think chorus works. It's the right length to be a chorus, even though there aren't a lot of lines. These lines take up a lot of time. So I think chorus is a fine way of looking at it. So verse 1, we have Peppa singing, and then Felix sings after her. And this is all just kind of pretty straightforward. We're rhyming day with day. The only thing that really changes is my versus our. We have sky and sky. Right? And then here we get a deviation. Bruno walks in with a mischievous grin. So we kind of have a little internal rhyme there. And then Felix interrupts with thunder. And then the classic, you telling this story or am I? I'm sorry, mi vida, go on. So this is just kind of like a little interlude in this first verse that breaks that pattern of having those exact rhymes. And then we get, Bruno says, it looks like rain. And doing so, he floods my brain. And then married in a hurricane are the rhymes, okay? So Peppa is the one rhyming here. And then Felix has his own rhymes. Tell us, umbrella us, that's kind of the rhyme there. And then day, but anyway is kind of the other one. So his rhymes aren't as consistent, right? But he still has kind of his own thing going on there. Then we get the chorus, and we move on to verse 2. Now, this is where we have a bit of a deviation. I have always kind of stated that the verse should sound more or less the same. That's why we call it the verse, right? I use that evidence to kind of defend my labeling in some of the other Encanto songs. But in this case, the verse does change depending on the character. So with Felix and Peppa, we get their kind of character in this verse. With Dolores, we get her character in verse 2, and then Camilo comes in as part of this verse with his own melody. But what's holding all this together is actually the bass line. There's this bass line that goes underneath the verse, and that is what I'm saying defines the verse. So even though the melody changes depending on which character is singing, which I think is a really nice, like, intentional technique that Lin-Manuel Miranda is using, right? He's using music to kind of show a little bit more about these characters. So in order to keep, like, the verses as their own identity, we have that bass line that goes through every verse. So it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different with how that works. But let's look at what Dolores has to say. So really strong stuff, right? Stuttering or stumbling, and then muttering and mumbling. Like, that's some long rhymes there. And then we get the break. I associate him with the sound of falling sand. And then we have humbling, fumbling, and understand. So we have this really nice, like, strong rhymes here, where it's like AAB, AAB, and then with a little bit of a tag again with that B kind of rhyme. So that's awesome. And then we have the next part, which is frame and name, right? Rhyme. Then Ratlong is back, and black. Those are those ah kind of sounds. Really, the only difference is the L consonant, right? So really close rhyme there. And then dreams and screams. So this is like A, B, A, B, and then C, C. So far, each person, in addition to having their own kind of melody, has had their own kind of rhyme scheme as well to kind of differentiate everyone. So that's a cool technique that he's using. We get back to the chorus, and then we have what I'm calling transition 1. So this is where I'm kind of mixing terms, which I mentioned in another video that I try not to do. I either use like the verse chorus kind of terminology, or I use things like this is an A section, a B section. We have a transition, we have a coda, we have et cetera, et cetera. Here, we don't have a verse, in my opinion, because the verse, in order for it to be a verse, it needs to have that bass line that goes underneath it all. We get kind of little anecdotes from the town members of prophecies that Bruno told them. The bass line isn't there. So I called this a transition, because that's what it's doing. And we'll see how the transitions work in this song. And it just was the best thing that I could think of. Like, this is a transition. After the transition comes what I'm calling the bridge. I accidentally left the parentheses in the bridge part instead of verse 4. So Genius Lyrics calls this verse 4, what I'm calling the bridge. Those are just flip-flop the parentheses, and that'll be it. So here, he told me my fish would die the next day dead. This is where I kind of feel like the end of the line is. He told me I'd grow a gut, and just like he said, right, so we have dead and said. He said that all my hair would disappear, now look at my head, right? And then your fate is sealed when your prophecy is read. So then we have our like A, if you feel where those end lines are, right? The way that it's split up here, which is how I found it online, at least from one source, like the die and guts, right? There isn't a rhyme there, but I don't think that's really where the end rhyme is. I think the end of the line is here on like dead and said, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so now this transitions us into the bridge. This feels very different when we get to Isabella's lines. Like the feeling is changed. There's just like the instrumentation drops out. We get those plucked or pizzicato strings, right? And we get Dolores coming back. So this is also the first time that we've had a singing character come back in the song. So it's, I think, feels very different from the other verses. We don't have the bass line, okay? And we get a return of a character, and like just the same feel isn't there. So I don't think verse 4 is a good label. I think bridge is a better label. So these are pretty simple. We just have mine and vine, and then we get the interjection about Mariano being on his way. Dolores' lines here do not rhyme hardly at all, which is kind of interesting. They were so strong before, and now here, right, there's been some sort of a change. That's why, again, I don't think this really fits as like a verse, because he told me the man of my dreams would be just out of reach, betrothed to another. It's like I hear him now. He says, I want not a sound out of you. It's like I hear him now. So now and sound, those kind of have that like vowel sound rhyme. But other than that, we don't really get any rhymes here. It's very weak. And then we get transition 2. So this is where Mirabel starts singing. So we have a transition to go into the bridge, and then we have a transition to go out of the bridge. And Genius Lyrics called this verse 5, which again, it was like, this shares even fewer things in common with the other verses, right? There's no bass line. Sure, there is a single character singing, but like it's that bass line that really makes the verses. This isn't really behaving like a verse. And as we kind of see later, we get verse 6 here, which for me would actually be verse 3. That's what I think this is here, is verse 3. And this makes sense because now we're getting all those different verses back, right? And in these lyrics that I pulled from the internet, we don't get those bridge lyrics here, right? So I'll have to listen again, maybe. The one lyric we do get is that Mariano is on his way. So, yeah, it's a little gray, right? This is where when we're getting to our analysis, like I'm saying the defining feature of a verse is having that bass line underneath it, and the bass line is here. So even if we're borrowing from other parts of the song, right? This is like the culmination. This is where the song has been building towards the whole time. We maybe able to call it like a culminating verse or something like that. But it would be the third verse if we're just sequencing the verses according to my analysis. So yeah, this transition is just Bruno, 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 Bruno. We have this little interjection about your boyfriend's here, time for dinner. We get the rhymes, right? Frame, name, back, black, that's all the same stuff from before. And then it features this final chorus. Genius Lyrics called this an outro. Very, I think, appropriate. It's kind of this tag bit, right? At the end. But to me, it feels like the chorus. Don't talk about Bruno, and I talk about Bruno, right? The thing that changes is that Mirabelle has a little bit more to say. Not a word about Bruno. I never should have brought up Bruno. Like, besides Mirabelle's like addition, right? It just kind of feels like the chorus. So it's like a final chorus. All right, so those are some of my labels here. We also talked a little bit about why I use those labels, right? That's important. And we also talked about some of the rhymes here. Now, this is an incredibly popular song from the soundtrack. And on a podcast, which I'll link this episode in the description, it's called the Pop Shop Podcast. Lin-Manuel Miranda was on and expressed that he was, didn't think this piece would be as popular as it is. Because as he put it, it's like an end of Act 1, right? So end of that first part of the story, kind of ensemble number. And these types of ensemble numbers aren't usually popular. This is according to just what he said on the podcast. So I thought that was interesting, and I wanted to look at it a little bit more. My initial thoughts on why this is popular is because the storytelling is really strong. Like, we've been building up to this moment, and this was foreshadowed in the first song, in Family Madrigal. Mirabelle's introducing everyone, then it's, we don't talk about Bruno, and now we do. So there's that foreshadowing, the storytelling. It's kind of a negative or like a forbidden thing, right? And that's something that I think just like resonates with people. Like, I was in a classroom the other day and the teacher said, all right, we don't have time to talk about this announcement, so let's just move on. And the students were like, oh yeah, we don't talk about Bruno. It's just like something that you kind of get. Oh, well, we don't do that. We don't talk about that. And in the movie, right, we kind of want to know more about Bruno. What is the secret? Oh, but we don't talk about Bruno. Except for right now, we're going to talk about it. And that makes it like really interesting from a narrative standpoint. And then the hook is just great, right? Like, having the name be Bruno and then have that go into no, no, no is just really memorable. People really latch on to that. And something that I think differentiates this from your typical maybe like music theater kind of ensemble number is this is the first ensemble number in the whole movie. Okay? So we get like a couple of times, right? Like with Luisa and Mirabelle in Family Madrigal, there's Abuela and Mirabelle. But to get everybody singing, including people in the town, this is the first time in the movie that that's happened. And I think that makes it really impactful, probably more impactful than your kind of close of Act 1 musical number, where we've had maybe an ensemble or maybe two ensemble pieces before that. So it's just kind of like, oh yeah, this is the ensemble number to close out the act. Now I get to get up and use the bathroom. So I think there's some of those things that are nice. I wanted to kind of compare it to some other Disney films, and I did a very just unscientific look at a Spotify, how many like plays these different songs have on Spotify. So in The Little Mermaid, one of the upbeat ensemble songs, okay, is Under the Sea. And this is what I would consider like an upbeat ensemble song. Different than like Kiss the Girl, right? Kiss the Girl is slower, even though you have lots of characters singing. It isn't that same kind of like upbeat, danceable kind of piece. So in Little Mermaid, Under the Sea is more popular than Part of Your World, okay? And I'm comparing this specifically to that like one song that the character sings, or like the big kind of like solo character moment, because that seems to be typically what's most popular in the movie. But in, like, again, just according to this one Spotify album of The Little Mermaid that I found. Not scientific at all. Under the Sea was more popular. So that's kind of like, okay, well, that's interesting. But then I kept looking, and in The Lion King, I Just Can't Wait to Be King is the most popular, which makes sense. And then Hakuna Matata, which to me feels like that upbeat kind of ensemble thing, is next. And then Circle of Life is the one after that. So we get, not a strong evidence for why maybe like these ensemble pieces are more popular in like a Disney film. Technically, Can You Feel the Love Tonight is number one in The Lion King, but I didn't include that one because it's not like a character in the movie singing it. So then we get to Beauty and the Beast, and Be Our Guest would be that kind of upbeat ensemble number, but it actually comes in under Beauty and the Beast, the track named Beauty and the Beast. Tale as Old as Time, which has some different characters singing it, but it's a slower song. And then Be Our Guest is more popular than the song labeled Belle and the song labeled Gaston. So comparing to these like small little sample size here, not a lot of evidence for this being a trend of having like ensemble numbers be super popular. I would definitely say that We Don't Talk About Bruno seems to be kind of an outlier, and I think it's an outlier based on those things that I mentioned earlier about how there's a narrative moment here, right? The storytelling is very good. We've been kind of waiting for this moment, and it's a relatable moment, right? Oh, we don't talk about that, but we're going to talk about it now. That's that kind of like secret, that you're interested in learning about. So then, I always try to do areas for improvement when I analyze a piece. It's very hard, I say it every time, that Lin-Manuel Miranda has done really good work here. And what I could find, it really just comes down to like a composer preference. But we can talk about some of those, right? Like kind of acknowledge the choices that Lin-Manuel Miranda made, but how he maybe could have made some different choices. So in the first verse here, we could have had Felix rhyme his own lines more, like tell us and umbrella us. That could have like been consistent throughout the thing, or he could have rhymed exactly. Well, he does rhyme exactly with Peppa up here, but he could have done like a perfect rhyme with Peppa to kind of reinforce that like he's always kind of following what Peppa has to say. So we do it like exactly first, and then when we get him back again, he is doing perfect rhymes with Peppa. That could have been an option. And then this kind of middle interlude paragraph is the weakest of all of them. We have one internal rhyme with walks in and mischievous grin, and then we don't really get anything else there, but this is kind of like a little break. Kind of similarly, Dolores's lines don't have very strong rhymes in the bridge, so that's kind of a bummer. I feel like these could have been a bit stronger. But again, like I mentioned, I think it's to contrast how strong her rhymes were in her verse. So there is like a purpose for kind of breaking the perfect rhymes, or like rhyming a large portion of her lines like we saw before. I think the most interesting one actually is this transition too. So we get Bruno a lot in this song. I mean, that's the whole point of the song is Bruno, right? And I think this fits here. This works so well because that is what the song is all about, Bruno. And we haven't gotten Bruno in a while, right? We had the chorus, then we have a transition, then we have two characters singing the bridge. So now we can get kind of back into Bruno to take us back to our big kind of culminating verse. So I think this is why it works, but we could have done something a little bit different. What I kind of came up with just rhymes Bruno with different things. So we could be like, I hope you're almost through. No, I really need to know about Bruno. Are all his prophecies true though? Isabella, your boyfriend's here, right? So we could have like rhymed Bruno with some other things just so we didn't get Bruno so much. But even then, like the way that this works is really great because we keep on lengthening the lines. Bruno. Yeah, about that Bruno. I really need to know about Bruno. Give me the truth and the whole truth, Bruno. So the way that like it kind of gradually gets longer and longer is a great technique. And then the last thing I want to say, this again is just like a little bit of preference. It seems like Mirabelle is addressing everyone here. I'm Bruno, about that Bruno, I really knew about Bruno. And then the last one, she's kind of addressing Bruno. Give me the truth and the whole truth, Bruno. So I just think like that is maybe a little strange. So there you go. There are just some thoughts that I have about this piece. The labeling is kind of ambiguous. There are different parts of this, like what actually makes a verse. Do we have, a verse at the end or that big culminating verse? Could we just call it a culminating verse? I mean, we can make up our own labels when we're analyzing things, as long as it kind of like makes sense, right? I mean, also we could just label everything a different name of a fruit, and that technically we could work. But what I think, I put makes sense. I think maybe like culminating verse, or if you wanted to put hook, like we could do some different things there. It's a cool piece. It's kind of an outlier as far as like an ensemble piece goes. Again, I kind of listed the narrative and storytelling really helps that along. So it's a great piece. I'm going to link a Howard Ho video on this piece because I think he does a really good job explaining some things. I did review that video because I don't agree with his take that this is a madrigal or related to a madrigal. So that'd be the only thing that I would say like take with a grain of salt. But otherwise, like he does a great job diving into like the different characters and things. And this video, of course, was just focused a bit more on the lyric structure and how kind of the lyrics and music all come together. So if you enjoyed that, please remember to like and subscribe. Check out my Patreon if you can. Thank you very much for all your support, and we'll see you next time.